Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program, Mollie Bailey, who is VP International at Transplace. And today we're going to talk about international supply chain trends and challenges. So here we are, a little past the halfway mark of 2022, and we're still dealing with a lot of risks and uncertainty in the world of supply chain management. And if you're an importer or exporter, moving goods via ocean carriers and ocean ports around the world, well, I think it's safe to say that every day is still a new adventure for you. So what international challenges are companies facing today? Which trends should companies keep an eye on? And what actions should companies take to mitigate some of these risks? And how can their 3PL partners help? Well, those are the main questions we're going to discuss in today's episode. It's great to have Mollie back in the program to share her insights and advice on this topic. So Mollie, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Adrian. Great to be on again and look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, so I think, the last time we spoke was, last year. I don't think it has even been a year yet since you were last on the program, but, certainly a lot was going on, particularly, I think the last episode we focused particularly on the ocean industry, what was going on with rates, which were, ballooning at the time and everything else. I think, the environment is different today, but there's still a mix of, challenges and everything else. So why don't we start there? I mean, obviously in your role at Transplace, I mean, you keep a pulse on many international trends and challenges. So which ones are you kind of keeping an eye on, today that companies should also keep an eye on?
I think the most concerning one is just overall the infrastructure in North America. The situation hasn't improved. And in some cases, I think it's actually worsened. So we're two years and, coming up on 6 months since COVID started. And, we saw really this just kind of breakdown of the system overall with the congestion, with the vessel queues. And it very obviously everything kind of floated to light about, gosh, these handoffs that happen with infrastructure when the containers are, getting, first it starts with the vessel queues, and they did some adjustments to that. And then when the container discharges, the handoffs to the rail, or the efficiency, the throughput of containers coming in out of the ports, of the container yards. And so the situation is ugly. And I think there was a lot of focus and hope that things would get, would improve, especially during, the slower time of the year in the spring. And in fact, the time that containers are dwelling, especially in Southern California, has worsened, and vessel queues and dislocation of equipment and the rail network are just a huge problem, frankly. And so I think that to me, that is kind of the flashing red light of, as much time as the current administration has spent, focusing resources, talking about various proposals, the new Shipping Reform Act. It's all great and it's all words that I don't think as shippers and intermediaries, we're seeing real, accomplishments in that area.
Yeah, no, I think, I think what COVID did and the ripple effects of the pandemic did was really, put a big bright spotlight on the fact that our infrastructure, and particularly on the ocean side and intermodal and all that, has been broken for a long time. And I think the challenging part is that there's no quick fix. This is something that should have been addressed many years ago, and it should have been something that's been, an ongoing, investments and improvements and innovations. But, now hopefully, the hope is that, that we start actually walking the talk on the need to, make these improvements to the infrastructure. And then, of course, today you have the added uncertainty of, what's happening on the labor front, right? With the on the West Coast ports, between the labor unions and the port operators, and then you've got this whole AB5 thing in California going on that's adding, so it's just this, piling on top of the existing challenges that you talked about, some of these more immediate things that companies have to deal with. So what are you hearing from your customers? I mean, when you talk to them, I mean, what are some of the top challenges that they're facing today? Perhaps, being caused by some of these the things you just talked about.
I get the sense that I think there's a bit of executive fatigue of hearing about the same issues over and over. And it's like, really, guys, we're 24 months plus into this. How can you still be saying that transit times are double and inventory carrying costs are outrageous because it takes 60 days to get product from Asia into the US versus normally would be less than 30. So I think shippers are having a hard time figuring out how to convince and continue to ensure that corporate leadership understands that things still really are broken. I think on the positive side, people are very happy that we are starting to see some deflation in regards to specifically for the Trans-Pacific, not transatlantic, but we are starting to see some rate compression. And I don't think we're going to see $20,000 East Coast container rates this peak. But there are still, we've seen efficiencies on the domestic side, with carrier acceptance and routing, just overall improvement in the routing guides for carriers. On the international side, we have not seen any operational efficiency, and I think that's the big challenge of it's still much more expensive than it was pre-COVID. It's still, you're having to build in just tremendous lead time and the flexibility to continue to use like multi-port entry gateways to enter. And every trade kind of has its particular nuances, which I think is also challenging to communicate, to leadership and to customers overall. And so I think there's just this overwhelming fatigue and frustration. And, there's been lots of articles talking about how much turnover there's been with supply chain leadership. And so, I think unfortunately for some people, leadership doesn't want to listen to it anymore. So they just, all right, let's get a new person in here and let them be the bearer of bad news. So interesting times, to say the least, as always.
Yeah, no, and that you bring up a great point. I mean, I think that's been one of the things I've been hearing a lot from supply chain executives is the importance and the need to continuously keep educating senior management about what is happening in the world of supply chain and logistics, and particularly on the international front, because you're right. I mean, I think historically, for executives, it's like, okay, it's there's a problem. Let's get resources in place. Let's solve this thing. But as we've already talked about, some of these things are not something that you can solve, by just throwing money at it, or, in the short term, and throwing people at it in the short term. I mean, these are, structural challenges and beyond the control of any one company or even any one country, because, we've seen, there's still the ongoing risk of, China shutting down ports because whenever they have another COVID, flare up and so forth. So these are things that are, to your point, are ongoing. So the importance of communication, I think, of ongoing communication is key, and the recognition that, that there's a lot that you can't control or do. That's kind of beyond your control, but obviously there's things that you can do, and you alluded to some of those things, and we'll get back to that question in terms of what actions companies can take. But I want to get to something you mentioned briefly a little bit earlier, and that's some of the things that the current Biden administration has been doing. And they've made improving the global supply chain kind of a top priority over the past few months and year. And the examples being the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, and then the U.S. Department of Transportation's Freight Logistics Optimization, or FLOW initiative, are a couple of examples. I mean, first of all, I mean, what are these initiatives, and are they helping? Are they enough? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so in regards to the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, I mean, that just got signed June 16th, right? So I am excited about certain aspects of that legislation. However, it was a law that kind of has a lot of TBDs in it, right? Like there's still a bunch of framework that has to be built out. And so the FMC has certain deadlines of, they had 45 days from the 16th to set up a framework for more easily being able to submit claims or request investigations into carriers' activities in regards to detention and demurrage. There's longer term goals, of course, as well. There's so I am super excited about the detention and demurrage piece in that legislation because it is a problem. 5 US ports are the most expensive in the globe, in the top 60 global ports. 5 US ports charge the most detention and demurrage of any ports, and they're all in the US, and that's a pretty sad statistic to have assigned to our global infrastructure. So I think the ability to more formally enforce fair practices in that regard is huge and important. And I do think that the carriers needed some oversight in that regard because it was very random. And, one of the huge pain points is it can be 6-9 months later. And then all of a sudden this random detention demurrage invoice will show up. And, you've already got people that have finished their budget years and, then they're scrambling. How can this be? And the carriers have never really had to justify the charges. And so I'm excited about that. I think some of the more challenging things, like, there's a lot of language concerning prioritization of export cargo, which I do think is very important. And we've seen absolute examples of carriers, just not accepting exports because they want to prioritize getting empties to somewhere else. So I'm not clear exactly how the FMC is going to enforce that. I did hear there's some other legislation that I think there were representatives that were trying to put in prioritizing, like if carriers are willing to accept a certain amount of export cargo, then they would get berthing priority, which is certainly a unique consideration and something to be considered. So I think there's just a lot of things that now have are mentioned in that bill, but we've got to wait until we practically see how quickly, if somebody brings a claim to the FMC, hopefully they're not going to have to wait 18 months to get some type of result from it, right? And so those are the things that I'm kind of wondering how all this is going to work. I mean, you and I both know the government usually doesn't act very quickly on things. And so I think, hopefully this won't become administratively burdensome as, it's already great to see people successfully winning these claims against the carriers. But that's just, I think, going to have a pile-on effect, right? So the queue is going to grow, and how is the FMC going to work through that? In regards to flow, I haven't really, that's interesting because I haven't seen much concrete results coming out of that. I mean, there's, the rail network in the US is broken, that's for sure. And it's causing major impacts to the time that the containers are dwelling and being able to get on the rail and move to inland locations. The government, the administration is now very involved in labor negotiations with the rail companies and trying to come up with a better way to work with the ocean carriers, work with port terminals to have some type of more scheduled metering ability so that there's just not this huge bottleneck of containers discharging at ports and then just sitting because one rail carrier puts in an embargo to certain locations, or they simply throw up their hands and say, hey, we don't have enough staff, we're doing the best we can. Like, to me, that isn't an acceptable answer at this point.
Yeah, so I mean, it goes back to what we said before. I mean, none of this is going to be solved, overnight. And there's still a lot of question marks related to a lot of these things. I think the positive, as you said, is that it's at least identifying some of the issues, the key issues that are existing out there, and at least getting the ball rolling on trying to bring the different parties, the different stakeholders together to say, hey, we've got a problem here. We better start acting together, working together to kind of, figure this out. But again, like all these things, there's a talk and then there's walking the talk. And I think that still remains to be seen in terms of, what actual action takes place and then what the outcomes are ultimately. But I think overall, I think it is, to your point, I think it's a positive development that at least, supply chain logistics and this part of the overall economy is getting a stronger look, from the government, and hopefully, again, I don't believe that the government is a silver bullet for just about anything, but certainly they can be a catalyst, when they apply their focus appropriately, and I think that could be the case here. So, in light of everything that we've talked about, let's get now, talking about what actions can, shippers take to mitigate some of these risks, to navigate through some of these challenges, and how can 3PL partners like, Transplace help?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in regards to the shipper community, it's a lot of the same that they've been doing. So overall, you make sure you've got longer lead times, especially out of Europe right now, because that Europe is a mess. I think their terminals may be more congested than ours. They're having huge labor challenges. Dock workers are striking and driver shortages. A lot of drivers in Europe were Ukrainians, and obviously they're focused on fighting a war. So extending lead times, right, as much as you can, using smaller tier ports, kind of the tier 2, the Baltimores and the Jacksonvilles and the Wilmingtons. On the West Coast, unfortunately, not a lot of great options. I mean, there's the Port of Portland that MSD and SM line are going into, but there aren't the options that we have like in the Gulf using Mobile and New Orleans. It is. I know there were some shippers that were using the Trans-Siberian route from Asia through Russia to Europe, and that obviously has been cut off due to the war. So, just continuing to partner with, for the big shippers, for the customers that the carriers haven't fired yet, continuing to hold and have really positive relationships and meet your forecasting, meet your allocations, and hold the carrier responsible for their, their contractual obligations as well. And then, play the NVO market. And, right now the spot rate's lower than some of the long-term contractual rates that were agreed upon in the spring. And so, use that as an opportunity. I have heard from customers that, for certain ports, carriers have been reaching out this year, kind of, more targeted. Hey, we are looking for space out of, whatever port, Xiamen or Guangzhou or whatever the port may be. So carriers seem to be more actively looking for partnerships where they have, deficits on volume. But the carrier relationships are still, I think, very, very difficult, and just in a lot of ways don't make sense. And I don't really understand the carrier's methodology at this point. I think they've kind of lost their way in regards to customer relationships, and who do they want to partner with? What is that kind of level where they want you to push you to the spot, and then what's the level where, oh, we do want to have long-term contractual, ongoing relationships.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think those are all great, great suggestions. And, I always say that, particularly when you're navigating through uncertainty and risk, there's nothing more important than having strong partnerships, whether it's with your suppliers, with your customers. So it's a little bit discouraging to hear that on the ocean carrier front, that's still not, there's some challenges there in terms of creating, maintaining some of those, some of those partnerships. But I think at the end of the day, I mean, I think it's really keeping a pulse on what's happening in the market because it is changing. And then being able to then communicate that up to senior management and other stakeholders that, I'm trying to understand the lay of the land, and understanding that there is no such thing as the status quo anymore, right? So you have to be creative. You have to be, be willing to be flexible and nimble because, what your game plan 6 months ago, or maybe even 3 months ago, may not be any good anymore because of whatever new disruption or situation, comes up. So you need to kind of continuously adopt your game plan. So I think in kind of terms of like, sports, methodology, it's almost like halftime every week, right? You have to kind of get back into the locker room and say, okay, what adjustments do we need to make in light of X, right? And then you go out there and that works for a little while, but then it's not working anymore. So you have to go back into the locker room and say, okay, now what adjustments do we need to make now to, to continue to, try to win this game, if you will.
Yeah, and I apologize, Adrian, because I did fail to answer the second part of your question. So, in regards to how we're trying to support, our customers, very much, there is a lot of information to comb through on a daily basis and keep abreast of what's happening. And so we really, our organization looks at that as very much one of our priorities. So making sure our customers know what's happening with OSRA, know what's going on with the ILWU negotiation and AB5 in California, and the global things that are happening in Europe and Australia has been tremendously challenging to import and export from. So ensuring that we're keeping people informed. And then again, it all comes down to the data, right? So having good overall visibility to, their freight movements, and then what does the data surrounding the moving freight, what types of insights can be gleaned from those, and talking to customers, and like your on time, overall schedule reliability is terrible, but guess what? There's not a lot you can do to change that. And at minimum, we can provide, peer comparison data to show here's where you are and here's where 5 other peers in your industry are. And, if there's any comfort in being part of the the overall, average, you're there, so it's not something that, you're just being picked on by bad transit times and things getting stuck at ports that can't get delivered.
All great points. I mean, I think, back in the early days when I started as an industry analyst, I think a lot of companies just, when they thought of their 3PL partners, I mean, it was purely for just transactional, right? Or execution, right? It's about, hey, help me move something from point A to point B. And obviously that's still part of the overall, value proposition, but more and more today, and certainly in recent years, it has been to, hey, access to experts such as yourselves and the human intelligence, the industry knowledge and expertise that you can bring to the table in terms of understanding what's happening in different geographies and different ports of the world, for example. And then the other aspect of it is a source of market data and intelligence for benchmarking and the like. And I think those are the things that are really, rising to the top today for a lot of shippers is, hey, you know what, we can't gather this data ourselves, or we only know what we do, right? But we want to have that broader perspective, that broader data, so that we can benchmark ourselves with, or just have that broader understanding of what's happening in the market. And then, if you can serve it as an extension of their staff in terms of bringing that international trade and global logistics expertise to their staff, I mean, that's the other, key thing, because, folks like yourselves and your colleagues there, you can't hire, there are only so many of you out there, and not if every company tries to hire them, there won't be anyone left to hire, right? So, it's your source of knowledge and expertise that they can tap into. So as a way to wrap up, Mollie, I mean, when it comes to global supply chains, I mean, what's going back to what we already kind of talked a little bit about, I mean, what's the supply chain professionals be communicating to their CEOs and CFOs in terms of what to expect, for the rest of 2022?
If I take out my magic 8 ball, I think I don't think that things are going to be as unpredictable as it was in the fall of 2021, right? We know what the problems are. We know that there is major. It all comes down to the handoffs, right? So when the vessel bumps against the port, when the container lands on the pier, and then whether it's getting trucked or railed, there are delays and problems with each of those handoffs, and that is well known and well communicated. So unfortunately, it's kind of like when you want to buy tickets to a really hot concert. You're probably going to have to get in there and well, in the old days when I was in school, we'd go stand in line and camp out overnight because we knew what to expect. So the supply chain professionals know what to expect. I think it's going to be a more, kind of a very stable, slow peak. We're kind of seeing it now where good numbers, but nothing like cliff jumping numbers coming out of Asia in regards to, oh my gosh, there's a swell of freight because Shanghai was shut down for 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And obviously there were behaviors done by some major companies that clearly they were concerned. They advanced a lot of inventory, and they've been very open. Walmart's, Targets of the world of, gosh, we brought in too much. We brought it in too early, and it's not really maybe going to match with what people are going to want to buy for Halloween or Christmas or back to school. So the challenge is you can't, the length of what it takes to issue a purchase order, get that product made and imported has grown. And so you can't pivot on a dime at this point. So I think it's knowing that we're headed into peak. It's probably going to be more of a stable kind of expected peak, and we're not going to see these crazy rate hikes week over week where you're biting your nail every Monday like, oh my gosh, what is this going to be? So hopefully that will provide a little bit of calmness in regards to the boardroom and supply chain budgets, but it's still going to be a challenging season. And I think that we keep being optimistic, like in 6 months this is all going to go away and we're going to go back to the old days. I don't know, there will be a new normal, but it's not going to be, we've had kind of a slack season the last 3 or 4 months, and we haven't seen any huge improvements. In fact, some areas have gotten worse. And I think there is some creativity I've seen in the Southeast, like the ports of Savannah and Charleston have been able to react more quickly and set up, off port yards and shuttle containers more efficiently and work through their queues quicker than say Southern California or New York ports have been able to. So I think there is creativity and happening within the industry, but these are not simple problems to solve. These are big deal problems that are going to take really a lot of combined joint efforts to really make us as efficient as the rest of the ports in the globe.
Well, great points. So I mean, what I'm hearing is, we're probably not going to have like a tidal wave of challenges like it was last fall, but choppy waters remain, and it's going to be you still have to remain creative and remain informed about what's happening, to continue to navigate to whatever the new normal is whenever it arrives, but it's still not here yet. So well, Mollie, as always, you provided some great insights and advice on this topic, and I'm sure that we'll have you back on the program, down the road and see where we are, in a few months' time, particularly after the holiday season, and see what the what the outlook for 2023 is. But again, thank you for making the time to be with us today.
Thank you, Adrian. I always enjoy talking with you.
I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Transplace website or on Talking Logistics, and you have a question or comment for Mollie, you can post it there, and I'm sure she'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for joining us and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.